watching it along with, I think, almost everybody else today, if they're not watching some other big event somewhere in the Middle East, is Khaya Sithole, the independent analyst. Khaya, good afternoon to you. This is probably the most transparent process the ANC has ever followed in terms of its leadership election. Is that a good thing for the party and maybe for the country?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers. I think it is, and I think if you remember in previous electoral contests, it's always been very unclear who exactly was backing or financing those particular campaigns. And obviously in 2017, what we then saw was a very clear division across two particular factions. And the rumor since then has been that essentially it was a matter of who had the most money. This level of transparency that then enables people to see what was said at the grassroots level, to be able to map that a particular province wanted a particular candidate, makes it a bit of a more linear process, because suddenly when we get to Nasrec, we should be able to sort of see the same trends emerging, particularly in positions where there's only two candidates. So you do not imagine that a candidate who receives 2,000 nominations and the competitor receives 900 nominations suddenly has that being upended and the numbers reflecting something completely different. What that will do is that it will enable the ANC to sort of put paid to the rumor that essentially people get given a mandate from the branches, but by the time they land in Johannesburg and they've been treated to some fancy five-star accommodation, they then change their views and decide to vote for whoever treats them better. So I think a lot of candidates will be actually aware of the fact that this makes it very difficult for people to betray the mandate that have been given by their own branches.
It also means there's predictability to an extent in government. And that's probably good for business. Not all business, but that's probably good for the way people are watching this process unfold.
Yeah, I think it is always the great surprises that are quite that create a sense of instability, because people want to be able to say, look, if this is what is likely to happen at a particular conference, then how do we react to it? Whether we are a business fraction or whether we are also political, affiliates of the ANC or alliance members, for example. So what you want to be able to do is to be able to sort of see a clear pathway of how these leadership elections take place, to be able to sort of map that what the branches want, which is what the ANC's architecture is all about, is essentially what gets delivered. An alternative where suddenly no one knows what's going on means that a lot of people start questioning the entire legitimacy of the system. They start questioning the legitimacy of the electoral process. And of course, those loss of faith and that loss of trust is not ideal for anyone.
Some positions are a lot more contested than others. You're right to, of course, point to the leadership position, where there's a big difference between the two candidates. For the deputy leadership position, too, Paul Mashatile seems to have a very strong lead. But for the position of Secretary General, it's a lot more contested, perhaps the closest of the three candidates for the Treasurer General position. Are you expecting a lot more contestation ahead of the conference?
I think so, because what you will see is that the candidates that have emerged, particularly for those two positions, there seems to be quite a divergence of opinion amongst ANC branches about who should be in that particular position. Now, obviously, when you look at the numbers, it may not always tell you the story that some provinces which have much bigger delegations, which have much bigger, branches, have decided to go and back a particular candidate. The problem with that is that should that particular province then switch, it simply means that there is a massive swing from one candidate to another. So it's always important to try and figure out who's got which backing, and in case something happens over the next 3 or 4 weeks that then persuades a particular province to change its view, then that's something that we need to watch. It's also very likely that some provinces will take the view that, well, it's pointless backing a three-way contest. Let us converge around a particular candidate, consolidate around that candidate, and then decide that this is at least the person that we're likely to bank on. Because at the end of the day, only one candidate can emerge, and if you are backing a candidate who's clearly behind other candidates, you may feel that, well, it's a wasted vote if we simply back somebody who's clearly not going to win the race based on what we've seen today. But of course, a lot can happen in the next 3 weeks.
A lot can happen. I mean, one of the things that's so interesting is always the position, the relationship between the leader of the ANC and the Secretary General. It seems Ndumiseni Ntuli from KwaZulu-Natal, but also played a long-time role at Latuli House, now really is the front runner for that job. Do you think he and Ramaphosa will be able to work together in a way that, I think it's fair to say, Ramaphosa and Ace Magashule never could?
Well, Ramaphosa and Ace Magashule quite simply never stood a chance. I think even from day one, you could see the fault lines. You remember that memorable speech that Esma Khashule delivered, I think it was in KZN, when he simply said it's 5 more years and then we correct what they regarded as the wrongs of Nasrec. So that was a fractured relationship from inception. Dumiseni Ntuli has actually acquitted himself relatively well in relation to this particular position at a very, very complicated province in KZN. So you would think that administratively he's not a novice. He's someone who knows how ANC systems ought to work. Whether they'll be able to pull that off at a national level, given the complexities around managing 9 different provinces and all the leagues, that will obviously be the litmus test for whether he emerges or not. But it's also quite interesting that his home province obviously had not backed him, and the basis for them not backing him is that they were obviously engaged in some element of horse trading, looking at 6 positions holistically rather than focusing on one. So the fact that he's been able to emerge in spite of that lack of endorsement from KZN province is a massive surprise for a lot of people, but also indicates that perhaps he's been doing much more work behind the scenes without the endorsement or the support of the big 6 in the top 5 in KZN.
It's also interesting to me that Dr. Gwen Ramakopa, who has been playing a role in the Secretary General's office, has a tiny number of nominations. I mean, she's not going to contest as a result. And that takes us straight to the point of gender. I mean, I think no political party in this country has done more to try and ensure an equitable representation of women in its top leadership than the ANC. It has a special formula to ensure that in the NEC. No other party does that I'm aware of. And yet, we only have one position where 2 women are contesting, and it's once again for the position of Deputy Secretary General.
Yeah, it is the ANC's great conundrum in that it has remained committed to gender parity in leadership. The problem is that in the definition of leadership, the ANC has never said that there are multiple tiers of leadership. So they don't say that, look, the definition of leadership says firstly in the NEC 1 gender parity, in the top 6 1 gender parity. So they look at the broader leadership collective, which was the NEC itself. Now, obviously, for a lot of people, this seems to be a bit of a cop-out because what it simply does is that it enables the ANC to essentially go through from conference to conference saying that we're committed to gender parity, and yet its most visible leaders, which are the elected top 6, quite simply never seem to reflect that. So that's the one aspect of it. The other part, of course, is the simple reality that it is, at the end of the day, a democratic process. So it may well turn out that the branches have really applied their minds and formed the view that, look, of all the leaders that exist within the ANC, these are the ones that we feel are best suited at this particular point in time to occupy these particular leadership positions. So whether that is a result of them applying themselves collectively and saying this is the answer is one aspect of it. But I do think that it requires the ANC to deliberate on the question of whether they do want to make it very explicit that even within this very visible engine room that they're creating, which is the top 6, they want to be able to champion that element of gender parity. And of course, there'll be heated debates around that on the basis that, well, is it still a democracy when you're essentially dictating to us as branch members who we should prefer, even if we may be of the view that one person is better than the other, but we have to then infuse the gender question and then end up with someone that we wouldn't otherwise prefer. It's a very difficult conversation for them to have.
Indeed. Khaya Sithole, thank you, the independent analyst.